All right, everybody. Uh, okay, you're now live. All right, everybody. Um, I hope that you've enjoyed chapter one and chapter two of Children of Midgard. I'm just going to keep reading because I'm having a lot of fun. Chapter three is called The Hellhound. Miss Honeycutt walked us to the library. She didn't talk much, but she wasn't grouchy, quiet. We didn't really know that much about her except her name, Linda Honeycutt. When we arrived at the library, she told me and Joe that she would like to talk to us and sent the other kids inside. She said, "Mr. Martinez told me how you two stayed behind to help Macy. I'm very proud of you both. Few students would have done that." She smiled. "Were you stung?" Joe said that she had been stung once on her neck. It was itchy. Miss Honeycutt said, "Is it okay if I put some ointment on there to help? I'm not allowed to give students medicine at school, but we're not at school anymore, and I think that it would help." Joe nodded, and Miss Honeycutt wiped a dab of what looked like beeswax onto the sting. "What is that stuff?" said Joe. "It stopped itching completely." Miss Honeycutt said, "It's just an ointment I keep in my purse." She turned to me and said, "Stephen, were you stung anywhere other than your hand and forearm?" I rolled up the sleeve of my t-shirt and showed her the red welts that ran all the way from my hand to my shoulder. "Here," I said. She counted the stings and shook her head. "I don't know why you refused to go to the hospital. Did they get you anywhere else?" I shook my head. "No, just my hand and arm. I wanted to see my dad." As she applied the waxy substance to my arm and rubbed it in, she said, "You don't think that he could come to the hospital?" "No, I know he could." I paused. I don't really like going to the doctor a whole lot, and these stings would probably have felt better by tomorrow anyway. That ointment stuff is amazing. I feel like I didn't even get stung. Did you get stung much? I thought you'd be in the hospital after that." She stowed it in her bag. "Yes, I did. I applied the ointment to myself a while ago. Let's go join the others." By 3 p.m., when school would have let out, everyone's parents had made it to the library except for Dad. Normally, this wouldn't be all that unusual because he worked long hours as an arborist. He tended trees in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, kind of like a forest ranger. Our mother died when we were babies. It would have been better to spend the afternoon outside since the weather was so nice, but the school had said we had to stay indoors. Since we had to, the library was the best place to do it. Joe and I both loved books more than almost anything, and it's easy to spend an afternoon lost in the library. Before wandering off into the stacks of books, I talked to Joe some more about my initial encounter with the magical bee and how everything had seemed funny at first. "You weren't scared?" she said. "No," I shook my head. "That's bull," she said. "A bee talked to you and you weren't even a little bit scared? You thought it was funny?" Okay, maybe I was a little bit scared. Because I'd be scared if I heard a talking bee. Know why, Stephen? Bees don't talk except maybe to other bees. And I don't even know if they do that because I'm not a bee. When Joe was aggravated, she drew out my name and stressed the second syllable even more than the first. "Stephen." "That doesn't make it scary, though," I said. She shrugged. "I just don't think you're being honest. Whatever, though." Well, maybe I was a little scared. "You looked like you were a lot scared." We went back and forth like that for a while, and eventually she decided there was a good reason I thought the bee was more funny than scary at first. I was a boy. I'm a boy, pardon me. Miss Honeycutt stayed at the library with us. Our most important discovery of the afternoon is that we liked her. She was funnier than we'd expected, funnier than I'd expected at least. Quick-witted like Dad, but she didn't show off how clever she was. We spent at least half of our time there playing games with her. Word games, dots and boxes, and cribbage, a card game that she taught us. Other than letting me know she expected better from me in my recent performance in math class, she didn't bring up school at all. We spent the rest of our time at the library reading. Joe finished The Hobbit, which she had started a couple of days earlier. I preferred the nonfiction section. Other kids used to think I was strange because they were reading books about fuzzy bunnies or junior detectives or whatever. I was tucked away in the nonfiction aisles. The secret that it took my friends a while to learn is that I spent that time camped out at Dewey Decimal number 741.5, comic books. I pulled down a 2-volume hardcover collection of Thor comics. I enjoyed the Thor movies, but I loved Thor comics. Movies are great and all, but comics can have way more complicated stories, and I like them better. I enjoyed Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, and the rest, but Thor was my favorite superhero by far because he wasn't exactly a superhero. He was a god who lived way out in space on the other side of a rainbow bridge, which was just cool. Dad never came to the library, and late in the afternoon, Miss Honeycutt decided to walk us home. The air was warm and kind of yellow, and the big blue sky was crisp and visible through the bare branches of the trees. We walked along slowly, enjoying ourselves and making small talk. I couldn't get over how much I liked our teacher away from school. When we were close to home, we saw a man walking toward us. It was our neighbor across the road, Mr. Kingsley. He told everyone to call him by his initials, VI. All I knew about him is that he was a priest when he was younger, but at some point he'd left the priesthood and become a general contractor, which has something to do with fixing up houses. Mr. Kingsley was tall and looked strong. He kept his face shaved and had super short hair. When he looked at you, you felt like he was really paying attention, and he seemed very young. He had wrinkles around his eyes that looked like they came from years of smiling. He had a few scars on his head, too. I'd always thought that the scars were mysterious. When we were little, I told Joe that Mr. Kingsley looked like a friendly pirate. Sometimes when we saw him coming, we'd say, "Arr!" like pirates. This afternoon, we did not, mostly because our teacher was there. Mr. Kingsley was holding a heavy, gnarled walking stick. "Miss Honeycutt," he called out, "it's nice to see you this afternoon. I trust you made it through today's strange events unscathed." She smiled and said, "A few stings, but nothing that won't heal in a day or two. I'm glad to hear it. How many bees were there? I've heard thousands, but that can't be right." She tilted her head and gave him a look. "I don't know, VI. I'd say more than thousands. Tens of thousands, maybe. I've never seen anything like it. I wouldn't believe it if I'd heard it from a lot of people, but I know you're a straight shooter." After a moment's silence, he asked, "Are you walking these two home?" Miss Honeycutt nodded. "No one was able to reach their father. Presumably he's on a mountain and can't be reached." He said, "I'll walk with you. If Paul doesn't arrive soon, we'll need to make them some supper. I can phone Jane and ask her to." Jane was his wife. "Thank you," said Miss Honeycutt. Joe and I thanked him too. The woods were quiet, and for the next few minutes, the only sounds we heard were our voices, our footsteps, and an occasional bird. When we walked around the final bend in the road before home, the silence was broken by a loud growl. A giant, snarling black dog leapt from the woods and landed on the road between us and the driveway. A split second after the dog's paws touched down, it leapt again, straight at Mr. Kingsley. Faster than I could have, he swung his walking stick up and slammed it against the dog. At the same moment, its paws thumped against his chest and knocked him down. The dog pawed at him, scratching his face. Then it snapped at his throat. Its teeth were huge. They looked like they belonged in an alligator's mouth. Everything about the animal was huge. It was at least 100 pounds, and its black hair was so short that its giant muscles were unmistakable. Mr. Kingsley swung his walking stick and smashed into the dog's jaw. Then he swung the other end of the stick around and hit its ribs. It didn't slow the dog down at all. He shouted, "Children, stay back!" We stepped behind him. At the same moment, Miss Honeycutt lifted a heavy rock and threw it at the black dog. The rock hit the top of its head, and it swung around toward her, baring its teeth. It snarled. Thick spittle dripped from its muzzle. Mr. Kingsley shouted, "Run!" and we got out of the way as he swung the walking stick over his head and smashed it into the back of the dog, which directed its attention back at him. He pounded the dog over and over, and it began to move more slowly as it tried to get past his walking stick. The grizzled man was growling and snarling at the dog like he spoke its language. Then he began shouting words in a language I didn't understand. The dog looked like it understood the situation better than I did. It looked as intelligent as a human. It looked like someone accepting a challenge. The dog shook its head, flinging spittle all around, and with all its strength, it charged at Mr. Kingsley, snarling and barking even more loudly than before. Miss Honeycutt grabbed our hands, and we began running toward the house as Mr. Kingsley rained blow after blow onto the animal's back and head. Once we had gotten far away from it, the black dog must have given up. It directed its red eyes toward our neighbor, our teacher, and then us. It growled slowly one last time, barked, and bounded away into the dark woods. And that is the end of chapter 3. So again, I'm going to stop a video, start another one in just a second so that I can have one for each chapter. I've got a couple more chapters in me before my voice gives out. And I want to do our musical credits like I've done with the other ones. The first song was Stranger on the Shore by Percy Faith and his orchestra. The second song was Ben by Percy Faith and his orchestra. Then we had two-part invention number 13 and three-part invention by Bach, played by Bela Fleck on the banjo. And then we had Ship Ahoy Mandalorians by Ludwig Göransson. All right, thanks y'all. I'll be back in a minute.